All right, let's jump right in. When you really look at the core of so many of our biggest stories, our philosophies, and even our own personal struggles, there's this one fundamental theme that pops up again and again: choice. This is an explainer about one of the oldest stories ever told, a story about two very different choices that ended up shaping two completely different destinies.
It's a question we've all asked, right? At some point in our lives, we look around and wonder, why is there so much pain? Why is there hardship and conflict and death? It's probably the most human question there is, and it really sets the stage for the big problem we're going to unpack today.
Now, here's what's really fascinating. The source material we're digging into, which includes commentary from theologian Marie Noel Thabut, makes a powerful argument. It suggests the answer isn't about some specific historical event. Instead, it's found in a symbolic story, a parable, that was created to explain the very roots of our human struggle.
So that's our starting point. We're heading into the famous Garden of Eden, but not as historians digging for facts. We're going in to try and understand a really powerful story about a single foundational choice. You've got to picture the person writing Genesis, way back around the 10th century BC. They weren't trying to be a scientist or a journalist. They were a person of faith, crafting this incredible story, this fable, to wrestle with the biggest questions of all. Why is there evil? Why do we have to die? Why is life sometimes just so hard? And this slide just lays out the central conflict beautifully. In the garden, you've got these two symbolic trees, and they represent two completely different ways of living. On one hand, you have the tree of life. This is the path of trust, of receiving life as a gift from a God you believe is good. On the other hand, you've got the tree of knowledge. This is the path of suspicion, of seizing control for yourself and deciding on your own what's good and evil. So how did humanity get steered from that path of trust to the path of suspicion? Well, the parable introduces an antagonist, and this character doesn't use brute force, but something way more subtle and way more dangerous.
The serpent shows up, and its first move is just a masterclass in manipulation. It asks this question that sounds kind of innocent, but it's a total distortion of the truth. God had given them every tree in the garden except for one, but the serpent twists that incredible generosity into this sweeping prohibition, making God sound like a petty tyrant. It's the very first seed of doubt. And look at what happens right away. The second she entertains that little bit of suspicion, her whole reality warps. That one forbidden thing suddenly becomes the center of her entire universe, and it completely overshadows all the amazing gifts she already has. The tree of life, which was supposed to be in the middle of the garden, gets mentally replaced by the tree of, you can't have this.
So here's the key takeaway. The serpent in this story isn't really about a talking snake. It's a symbol for an idea, a mortal poison. It's that nagging voice of suspicion that, once you let it in, just contaminates everything. It turns a world full of gifts into a world full of things you think you're being denied.
Okay, so now we get to see the massive ripple effect of this one choice. The Apostle Paul, writing his letter to the Romans, basically argues that this decision didn't just affect one couple in a garden. Oh no, it created a whole pattern, what he calls a reign of death, that has echoed down through all of human history. But he also introduces a counterfigure who can change everything.
This slide just lays it out so clearly. On one side, you have Adam. He represents that choice of disobedience which was born from mistrust. The consequence? Condemnation, leading to this reign of death. But then, on the other side, you have Christ. He represents the total opposite choice, obedience, born from absolute trust. And the consequence there? Justification, life, ushering in a whole new reign of grace. One choice leads down, the other leads back up. And that brings us to a second really foundational story, Jesus in the desert. Now, this isn't just some random event. It's presented as the direct reversal, the perfect antidote to the choice that was made back in the garden. Adam was tempted and fell. So now, let's see how this new path gets forged.
Okay, temptation number one. It's all about self-sufficiency. Jesus has been fasting for 40 days. He's starving. So the tempter says, hey, use your power to take care of yourself. Seize control of your situation. Sound familiar? It's the exact same impulse as reaching for the forbidden fruit.
But Jesus just refuses. He flips the script. He chooses to depend on God instead of relying on his own power. It's this radical act of trust, basically saying that spiritual life from God is way more important than physical bread. He chooses the path of receiving, not seizing.
Now, this second temptation is even sneakier. The tempter actually starts quoting Scripture, telling Jesus he should test God, force God's hand to prove his love and protection. This is the ultimate act of suspicion disguised as an act of faith. It's demanding proof instead of just trusting.
And again, Jesus sees right through it. He refuses to play that game, refuses to treat his relationship with God like some kind of cosmic experiment. Real trust doesn't need to keep demanding proof. It just rests in faith.
And then comes the grand finale, the ultimate offer: power, glory, control over every kingdom in the world. All he has to do is switch his allegiance. This is the temptation to build his own kingdom on his own terms, completely separate from God. It's the very definition of the choice Adam made.
And with that one final, decisive response, Jesus makes his choice absolute. He chooses total, unwavering allegiance to God. He completely rejects that path of self-made power and glory. The reversal is finally complete.
So, what does this tale of two choices, one in a garden and one in a desert, actually mean for us right here and right now? Why does this ancient parable still matter so much?
And here it is. This is the core idea of the whole thing. Adam tried to grab the things that can only ever be received as gifts: life, wisdom, freedom. And in the very act of seizing them, he lost them. Jesus, by making the exact opposite choice, trusting instead of seizing, completely reverses that pattern. He opens up a new way for humanity, a path out of that reign of death and back toward life.
There's this incredible quote from the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, which is actually mentioned in our source commentary, and it just perfectly nails this entire idea. The real issue isn't about being perfectly behaved versus misbehaving. It's about the fundamental direction of your heart. Are you operating from a place of suspicion and mistrust, or from a place of faith?
And that really leaves us with the same question this parable has been asking for thousands of years. In our own lives, when we're staring into the unknown, when we're feeling afraid or tempted, which path are we going to take? Do we listen to that voice of suspicion that tells us to grab on, to seize control for ourselves? Or do we choose the much harder, but maybe, just maybe, the more life-giving path of trust?